One day, an elderly couple was taking a break from their chores, sitting outside their run-down little house. Out of nowhere, this fancy carriage rolls up, 4 sleek black horses pulling it, and out steps a man dressed to the nines, like he just walked out of a royal ball. The old man, curious and polite, got up, walked over, and asked, "How can I help you? What brings you here?" The man smiled, reached out his hand, and said, "Honestly, I'm not here for anything big. I just want to try a good homemade country meal. Could you cook me some potatoes the way you usually make them? I'd love to sit down with you and enjoy them." The old man chuckled and replied, "Well, you're clearly someone important. Maybe a count, a prince, or even a duke. You noble folks always have these quirky ideas, huh? But all right, you've got yourself some country potatoes coming up." The old man's wife headed into their tiny kitchen, washing and scrubbing the potatoes before shaping them into balls, just the way rural families typically prepare them. Meanwhile, the old man turned to the visitor and said, "Come with me to my garden while my wife handles the cooking. I've got a few things to finish up there." In the garden, there were holes already dug, ready for some new trees to be planted. As they worked, the visitor asked, "Don't you have kids who can help you with this stuff?" The old man sighed and replied, "I did have a son once, but he left a long time ago. He was bright and clever, but he didn't want to learn anything useful. Always getting into trouble, pulling stunts. Eventually he ran away, and I haven't heard from him since." The old man grabbed a young tree, set it in a hole, and hammered a post next to it. He shoveled in some dirt, packed it down with his foot, and then tied the tree to the post with straw ropes, one at the top, one in the middle, and one near the bottom. The stranger watched for a moment and asked, "Why don't you tie that bent, gnarled tree over there too? It's practically lying on the ground. Shouldn't you straighten it up like the others?" The old man grinned. You're not a gardener, are you? That tree's already old and misshapen. There's no fixing it now. If you want a tree to grow straight, you've got to guide it while it's young." The stranger raised an eyebrow and said, "That's just like your son, isn't it? If you'd guided him when he was young, maybe he wouldn't have gone astray. By now, he's probably as crooked as that old tree." The old man sighed. "You're not wrong. It's been ages since he left, though. He must have changed by now." "Would you even recognize him if he came back?" the stranger asked. "Not by his face," the old man admitted. "But he's got a birthmark on his shoulder shaped like a bean. That I'd recognize." Hearing this, the stranger took off his coat, rolled up his sleeve, and revealed the mark. "Good heavens!" the old man cried. "You're my son!" His heart filled with love, but confusion quickly followed. "How can this be? You're dressed like a lord living in luxury. How did this happen?" The son smiled wryly. "Well, you see, the young tree wasn't tied to a post, and I grew crooked. I've become a thief, but not just any thief. I'm a master thief. Don't worry, I don't rob poor people. In fact, I'd rather help them. I only take from the rich, and I never steal anything that's easy to grab. It's all about skill and cunning for me." The old man shook his head. "Son, no matter how you spin it, a thief is still a thief. This can only end badly." The old man brought his son to his wife. When she realized it was her boy, She burst into tears of joy, but when he told her he was a master thief, her joy turned to sorrow, and tears streamed down her face. "Even if he's a thief," she said, "he's still my son. At least I've seen him again." They sat down to eat together, sharing the same simple meal the son hadn't tasted since he was young. The old man warned, "If the Count up at the castle finds out who you are and what you've done, he won't hold you like he did when he baptized you. He'll have you hanged." The son shrugged. "Don't worry, Father. He won't harm me. I'm too good at what I do. In fact, I think I'll go see him today." As evening approached, the master thief climbed into his carriage and headed to the castle. The Count welcomed him politely, assuming he was a nobleman. But when the thief revealed his identity, the Count's face went pale, and he stayed silent for a while. Finally, he spoke. "You're my godson, so I'll show mercy instead of justice. But since you're so proud of your skills as a master thief, I'll test you. If you fail, you'll marry the rope maker's daughter and meet your end to the sound of a raven's croak." The thief didn't flinch. "All right, my lord. Name 3 tasks. Make them as difficult as you want. If I can't do them, you can do with me as you like." The Count thought for a moment, then said, "First, you'll steal the horse I keep for my personal use from my stable. Second, you'll sneak into my bedroom while my wife and I are sleeping and steal the sheet from under us, along with my wife's wedding ring. Third, you'll steal the parson and the clerk right out of the church. Remember, your life depends on completing these tasks." The master thief headed into town and bought himself some old peasant woman's clothes. He put them on, dirtied up his face, and painted on wrinkles so realistic that even his own mother wouldn't have recognized him. To finish the disguise, he filled a small keg with old Hungarian wine, spiked with a strong sleeping potion, and packed it into a basket. With that, he threw the basket over his shoulder and hobbled toward the Count's castle, walking like a frail old woman. By the time he arrived, the sun had set, and the castle courtyard was dim. He plopped down on a stone, coughing like someone with bad lungs and rubbing his hands together as though freezing. Nearby, a group of soldiers was sitting around a fire in front of the stable. One of them noticed the old woman and hollered, "Hey, Granny, come warm yourself by the fire. No sense freezing out there, especially if you don't have anywhere to stay tonight." Gratefully, the master thief shuffled closer, asked one of the soldiers to help her, or him, get the heavy basket off her back, and sat by the fire. "What's in the cask, Grandma?" one soldier asked, eyeing the keg. "Just a bit of wine," the old woman replied. "I make my living selling it. For the right price or a kind word, I'd be happy to share." "Let's have a taste, then," said the soldier. He downed a glass and smacked his lips. "That's some good stuff. Pour me another." One by one, the soldiers joined in, helping themselves to the wine. Soon, one of them yelled into the stable, "Hey, you guys, come out here. This old lady's got wine as ancient as she is. It's better than sitting by the fire." The old woman followed the soldiers into the stable, carrying the keg. Inside, she found one soldier sitting in the saddle of the Count's prized horse, another holding the bridle, and a third gripping the horse's tail. She poured wine generously, keeping it flowing until the keg was empty. Before long, the sleeping potion kicked in. The soldier holding the bridle dropped it, slumped to the ground and started snoring. The one clutching the horse's tail let go, curled up on the floor, and began snoring even louder. The soldier, still sitting in the saddle, stayed upright, but drooped forward until his head was almost resting on the horse's neck, breathing heavily like a blacksmith's bellows. The soldiers outside had already passed out, sprawled on the ground as if they'd been knocked out cold. Seeing his plan had worked, the master thief got to work. He slipped a rope into the hands of the bridle-holding soldier and stuck a bundle of straw in the one who'd been holding the tail. But the one in the saddle was trickier. He couldn't just dump him onto the ground without risking him waking up and raising the alarm. Thinking quickly, the thief unbuckled the saddle, attached some ropes hanging nearby to the saddle, and hoisted the sleeping soldier into the air, dangling him from a ring in the wall. He wrapped the ropes around a post to secure him and left him snoozing mid-air. Now for the horse. The master thief unchained it, but he couldn't risk the sound of its hooves clattering on the castle's stone courtyard. So, he carefully wrapped the horse's hooves in old rags to muffle the noise, led it outside, climbed on, and rode off into the night, galloping silently away from the castle. At dawn, the master thief rode up to the castle on the stolen horse, looking as smug as ever. The Count was already awake, standing by the window. "Good morning, Count," the thief called out cheerfully. "Here's your horse, safe and sound. Oh, and by the way, your soldiers, they're all still snoozing like babies. You should check the stable, too. It's practically a cozy little nap spot now." The Count couldn't help but laugh, though he tried to stay serious. "All right, you got me this time," he said, "but don't think it'll be that easy again. Next time you try to pull something, you'll be treated like the thief you are, no mercy." That evening, the Countess went to bed with her wedding ring clenched tightly in her fist. The Count, determined to outsmart the thief, locked and bolted every door. "I'll stay awake and wait for him," he said. "And if he dares to come in through the window, I'll shoot him." The master thief had other plans. Under the cover of night, he crept to the gallows, cut down the body of a poor soul who had been hanged, and slung it over his shoulder. Carrying the body back to the castle, he set up a ladder outside the Count and Countess's bedroom window. He climbed the ladder with the corpse on his back, making sure the dead man's head was visible just above the windowsill. The Count, who was lying in bed, saw the figure and fired his pistol without hesitation. The thief immediately dropped the body, letting it fall to the ground with a thud, and ducked into the shadows. The moonlight was bright enough for him to watch as the Count climbed out of the window, descended the ladder, and carried the body into the garden. The Count, thinking he had just killed the thief, started digging a grave to bury the evidence. Perfect timing, the thief thought, and he quickly climbed up the ladder and into the Countess's room. "Dear wife," he said, mimicking the Count's voice, "the thief is dead. But after all, he was my godson. He was more of a troublemaker than an evil man. I don't want to shame his parents, so I'll bury him myself before morning so no one finds out. Hand me the bedsheet. I'll use it to wrap him up." Believing it was her husband, the Countess handed over the sheet. "Oh, one more thing," the thief continued, still using the Count's voice. "I'm feeling generous. Give me your wedding ring, too. The poor man risked his life for it. He might as well take it with him to the grave." Though reluctant, the Countess slipped the ring off her finger and handed it to him. With the sheet and the ring in hand, the thief quietly slipped away and made it back home without a hitch. By the time the Count finished burying the thief in the garden, the real master thief was already far from the castle, grinning at his success. The next morning, the master thief swaggered up to the Count with the sheet and ring in hand, grinning like he had just won the lottery. The Count's jaw practically hit the floor. "How is this even possible?" the Count stammered. "Are you some kind of wizard? I buried you myself. How did you crawl out of the grave and come back to life?" The thief chuckled. "You didn't bury me, Count. That was just the poor guy from the gallows. Here's how it all went down." He laid out the whole story step by step, and the Count couldn't help but admit the thief was absurdly clever. "All right, you win this round," the Count said, fuming. "But you've got one last challenge. Fail this, and all your victories mean nothing." The master thief just smirked and walked off without a word. When night fell, the thief grabbed a long sack, a bundle of stuff, and a lantern. He headed to the village church, ready to pull off his wildest trick yet. Inside the sack were crabs, and in the bundle he had small wax candles. Sitting in the eerie quiet of the churchyard, he took a crab, stuck a candle on its shell, lit it, and let it crawl around. One by one, he repeated this until the graveyard was dotted with little glowing crabs scuttling about. Then he slipped into a long black robe, threw a fake gray beard onto his chin, and transformed himself into something that looked like a spooky monk. Once he was fully disguised, he grabbed his empty sack and climbed into the church's pulpit. The clock struck midnight, and as the final chime echoed, he boomed in a deep, dramatic voice. "Listen, you sinners. The end of the world is here. The last day has arrived. I, St. Peter, guardian of heaven's gates, am here to guide the worthy. Outside, the dead are rising, gathering their bones. If you want to escape the destruction and make it to heaven, climb into this sack. Quickly now, your time is running out." His voice carried through the village, and lights from the crabs in the churchyard added to the creepy vibe. The parson and his clerk, who lived nearby, heard the commotion. They peeked out, saw the lights flickering among the graves, and decided to investigate. Inside the church, they listened to the sermon in shock. The clerk turned to the parson, whispering, "This might be our chance to get into heaven without all the usual hassle. What do you think?" The parson nodded, trying to keep his cool. "Honestly, I was thinking the same thing. Let's do it. But since I'm the parson, I'll go first. You can follow." The clerk agreed, and the parson climbed up to the pulpit, where the disguised thief held the sack open. The parson climbed in, followed by the clerk. Quick as a flash, the thief tied the sack shut, hoisted it onto his back, and started dragging it down the pulpit steps. As the two unlucky fools inside bumped their heads on every step, the thief called out, "We're crossing the mountains now." He dragged the sack through the village, deliberately pulling it through every puddle he could find. "Ah! We're passing through the wet clouds now," he shouted. Finally, he lugged the sack up the steps of the Count's castle. "Here we are, climbing the stairs to heaven. Just a little further, and we'll reach the gates." At the top, he pushed the sack into the pigeon house. The startled pigeons flapped and fluttered around, and the thief yelled, "Listen to the angels singing and flapping their wings in joy." He bolted the door, leaving the parson and clerk trapped inside, and walked away, probably laughing all the way home. The next morning, the master thief strolled up to the Count with that signature smirk of his. "Well, I've done it again," he announced. "The third task is complete. I even managed to carry the parson and the clerk out of the church." The Count raised an eyebrow. "Oh, really? And where exactly are they now?" "They're up in the pigeon house, stuffed in a sack. They think they're in heaven right now." The Count couldn't believe it, so he marched up to the pigeon house to see for himself. Sure enough, there was the sack, and when he opened it, out tumbled the parson and the clerk, both looking dazed and confused. After freeing the unfortunate pair, the Count turned to the thief and said, "You really are something else, an absolute master of your craft. You've won the wager, fair and square. But let me tell you this. This is the only time you'll walk away unscathed. If I ever catch you on my land again, I'll personally see to it that you're hanging from the gallows. Got it?" The thief nodded, gave a cheeky bow, and went to say goodbye to his parents. Then, with his bag of tricks and a heart full of mischief, he wandered off into the world, never to be heard from again.